Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to avoid industrial action by teachers.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
I'm absolutely committed to supporting a fair pay offer for teachers through the Scottish Negotiating Committee for Teachers and to preventing unnecessary industrial action. Strikes in our schools are in no one's interest, least of all for pupils, parents and carers who have already faced significant disruption over the past 3 years. Members will be aware that only COSLA, as employers, can make a formal pay offer to the teacher unions. Myself and my officials are in regular dialogue with COSLA to identify options to support an increased pay offer. I've also been in regular contact with the unions to establish whether there is any scope for a shift in their negotiating position. I last spoke with union representatives as recently as Friday the 18th November. We continue to work closely with COSLA to deliver a fair, affordable and sustainable settlement for teachers and one that can avert unnecessary strike action.
Mr Kerr.
Well, I was hoping that we would hear something more positive than that answer that I've just received. And I would remind the Cabinet Secretary that she is a party to the negotiations. As much as she might like to try and distance herself from them, she has a seat at the table. But let's not forget, it should never have come to this. These negotiations should have been concluded weeks and months ago, not still taking place less than 36 hours before a strike is due to take place. Teachers have been let down by an SNP government that has been too slow to come to the table and take decisive action to resolve the pay disputes. Pupils and parents have been let down by an SNP government that says education is their top priority but cannot even keep the schools open. Even if strikes are called off, parents have had to scramble around for childcare. Pupils have had the additional stress of possible loss of days of learning. If the worst comes to pass and strike action goes ahead on Thursday, what plans are in place? And what is the Cabinet Secretary going to do to help pupils catch up on lost learning? Will the Cabinet Secretary take the opportunity now to apologise to parents and pupils for this stramash of her making?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, as I was very clear in my original answer, yes, the Scottish Government does have a role in these pay negotiations, but the offer must come from COSLA as the employers, and 4 offers have indeed been made so far. We, of course, want to do all we can to ensure there is a fair and affordable resolution to the current pay dispute. However, I do have to be frank with Mr Kerr. The United Kingdom Government made clear in the autumn statement that there is no additional support for public sector pay, not 1 penny. So I'm afraid the 10% pay claim that is coming from the teacher unions is unaffordable to the Scottish Government. Any extra money for pay deals will have to be found elsewhere within an already contained Scottish Government budget. So the place that we are in lies absolutely with the UK Government and the mess that they have driven to the UK economy and to the levels of inflation.
Thank you, members.
That is the reality of the situation that we are in. So we will absolutely continue to work with COSLA to deliver a fair and affordable settlement for teachers. But the context that we are working in is exceptionally important, and it, quite frankly, does a disservice to everyone involved in this for Mr Kerr not to actually pay cognizance to that.
Mr Kerr.
What an embarrassment. What an embarrassment to Scotland to have a Cabinet Secretary in an area like education, which is fully devolved, blame the UK Government. It is beyond pathetic. No wonder teachers are leaving the profession. Who can blame them? Teachers are striking over violence in classrooms, the lack of permanent contracts for teachers when they finish their probation. Their voices are ignored in SNP education reforms. This Cabinet Secretary, by that answer alone, is letting down teachers. Add that the fact that they've been waiting 7 months for a deal on pay. Teachers are already at least £2,000 out of pocket because of this delay. What was stopping the Cabinet Secretary negotiating a deal in April? It's absolutely negligent on her part to have allowed things to get to this sorry pass. The Cabinet Secretary has been missing in action for months. Why? Why does this SNP Scottish Government hold teachers in such contempt? The Cabinet Secretary, presiding officer, must do better. Will she now apologise to the teaching profession for letting them down and ignoring them?
Cabinet Secretary.
As I've already said to Mr Kerr, there have been 4 offers made to the teaching unions by COSLA during this current dispute. But it is very important to recognise what the Scottish Government has already done during this dispute. For example, we have already committed £50 million towards the teachers' offer that's currently on the table. And if the current deal had been accepted by teachers, which I accept it was not, it would have allowed teachers to get a cumulative increase since 2018 of 21.8%. It would have also ensured that the starting salary for a newly qualified teacher would have been over £35,000, significantly more than the £28,000 in England. So we will continue to do our best for teachers, as we have done in the past, with both the contribution that we have already made this year and to pay deals in the past. But again, the context is key. We have already had to make hard choices as a Scottish Government. The Emergency Budget Review made that very, very clear. The funding must come from elsewhere within the Scottish Government budget. And Mr Kerr can come to the Chamber and bluster all he likes, presiding officer, but what I did not hear in any of the challenge that he gave to me was a suggestion of how we could actually improve the offer, where that money would come from and what he would want the savings to be made from. Unfortunately, the position that we are in is those savings would have to be found elsewhere. That is the context and the reality of the situation.
Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the update from the Scottish Government on action it has taken to avert industrial action, which would be in no one's best interests. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that if the Scottish Tories are looking to place the blame, then they should look closer at their colleagues down in Westminster, whose austerity policies have effectively tied the Scottish Government hands when it comes to public pay rises?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I agree there is a responsibility on the UK Government. They could have acted in the UK Autumn Settlement to provide additional funding, and they did not. And I would refer the Chamber to a recent letter by the Welsh Education Minister, Jeremy Miles, who said in a letter to the teaching unions in Wales that it is simply not possible for the Welsh Government to fund such a rise without a substantial increase in our own budget to pay for it. It is a disgrace that the UK Government has left us in such an impossible position. That is unfortunately also the reality that the Scottish Government's position is too.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer, and my apologies that I'll have to depart during topical questions due to a prior appointment. My apologies both to you and the Chamber. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answers? And the previous contribution from Jackie Dunbar talked about public workers. How is it that public workers in Scotland seem to need to get to the stage where they are balloted for strike action, they are on the very eve of strike, and then suddenly, well, only if the correct Cabinet Secretary turns up, we seem to get settlements? We heard in the reflection that we should avoid discourse, look for concord, be in tune with the desires of our people. Wouldn't it be better to carry out these negotiations, in the case of the teachers back in April, in a more honest, open fashion, so that we don't end up with this challenge as we always approach Christmas?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I said on numerous occasions now, Presiding Officer, 4 offers have been made, including at the start of this process. And what the Scottish Government has attempted to do as the year has gone on is react to the reality of the situation in terms of the UK economic context and to try and assist as far as we possibly can with public sector pay. So we have, as I've said already, as the Scottish Government already contributed £50 million towards assisting a local government with the teachers' pay dispute. I would very much like to see this dispute, of course, being resolved. It is in the best interest of everyone involved, particularly our children and young people. But again, the reflection we must all have in these difficult times is if further pay offers need to be made, that money will need to be found within the education budget. And that is exceptionally difficult to do and will not be without its implications. Now, the blame for that does lie squarely with the UK Government. We will take responsibility for where we will make those decisions. But Mr Kerr, from a sedentary position, might not like it, but he needs to take some responsibility for the context we are in.
Briefly, thank you. Willie Rennie.
I think the Cabinet Secretary has to accept there's a lot of anger in the teaching profession. This is the first time in 40 years they've engaged in this kind of action, and there was 96% voted in favour of industrial action. She and others have been accused of dither and delay by Andrea Bradley. The clock is ticking. By 4:30 today, we could end this strike. If a new offer was to be made and it was to be accepted by the unions. So is the Government going to make a new offer through the negotiating system so that we can end this strike on Thursday?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I've said in my original answer, Presiding Officer, it is COSLA who will make a new offer to teachers, and we are all cognisant of the timings of the EIS committees that are having today. But I would again repeat the position I have already made. We are, as a Scottish Government, determined to do everything that we can to support teachers for a fair and affordable offer. We've already committed £50 million to the offer that was already in the table. Of course, we are working with local government to see where further savings could be made, to see how that improved offer can be made. That will have implications, unfortunately, for the rest of the education budget if such a deal was to happen.